You're listening to episode 34 of Literacy in Color. Welcome to the Literacy in Color podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Sullivan, a science of reading advocate with over a decade of experience as a reading interventionist and literacy coach. I'm passionate about making evidence-based instruction both effective and engaging. If you're interested in captivating our learners on reading fluently and understanding language, or as I like to call it, keeping it colorful, then you've found the right place. Each week, we'll explore intriguing lit bits and practical strategies around the science of reading and structured literacy to help you be colorful and teach colorfully. Are you ready to bring literacy to life? Let's color outside the lines and make an impact together. Hey there, and welcome back to Literacy in Color. Today, we're talking all about sight words and the process of orthographic mapping. Yes, that big fancy term that has become quite the buzz in education within the last few years. But this buzz term is actually what holds the key to how our students remember words and how it relates to our sight word bank. If you've ever handed your students flashcards, practiced spelling with chants, or made your class try to memorize lists of words, then this episode is for you. We're going to get super clear on what the research says, what actually works, and what we might want to rethink. So let's dive in. Let's start by defining our terms. I've mentioned before on the show, I studied classics in my undergrad, and I had this philosophy professor that always instilled in us to define our terms. And obviously, that has stuck with me after all these years. Just because you call something by a certain term doesn't mean the person engaging with you has the same understanding of said term. So, let's kick off this episode by talking about sight words. What is a sight word exactly? Sight words are words we recognize instantly without the need to sound them out. This automatic recognition results from a mental process called orthographic mapping, where our brains connect the letters in a word to its pronunciation and meaning. And through repeated exposures and going through that heavy lifting of decoding, these connections become so strong that we eventually can read the word effortlessly, both in isolation and in context. It's important to note that words are not called sight words because we learn them by sight. Instead, we know them by sight after they've been orthographically mapped. There's no universal list of sight words, and what constitutes a sight word varies from person to person, depending on which words they've successfully mapped into their long-term memory. My sight words are different from your sight words, and my sight word bank is vastly different from my doctor cousin's sight word bank. And hey, my 5-year-old daughter's sight word bank is just starting to develop. You may be thinking, no sight word lists? I'm confused. Well then, what's up with all the sight word lists that our schools send home, making students memorize all the time? Why are there so many reading resources out there that use the term sight words? Essentially, they're using the wrong jargon. They're actually referring to high-frequency words, the most commonly occurring words in print. These are words like the, and, words that we see everywhere. Their frequency in print is high, therefore you can see why knowing them instantaneously as sight words would be beneficial. And here's the thing. As you can imagine, the more sight words we have banked, the more fluently we can read. And perhaps you've heard the endearing saying, every word wants to be a sight word when it grows up. The goal is to grow our sight word knowledge so that we can be proficient, fluent readers. And fun fact, David Kilpatrick says that the average literate adult, like yourself listening, has a sight word bank of 30,000 to 70,000 words. We can call this our instant orthographic lexicon. This allows us to read a word in 1/20th of a second at a rate of approximately 150 to 220 words a minute. And the more words we've mapped, the faster and more fluently we read. This is what allows us to read with ease, focus on comprehension, and actually enjoy reading. Amazing, right? So, how do we build this sight word bank? The brain has to undergo a process to store these words. And spoiler alert, the process is not memorization. Our brain does not have the capacity to memorize 30,000 to 70,000 words visually as whole units. The most efficient way to help students build their sight word banks is for them to undergo that process of orthographic mapping. So, let's go back to the drawing board and define our terms again. Lord knows I'm all about morphology and certainly can't resist a good morphology deep dive. So let's tap into those morphemes for a crystal clear understanding of what orthographic mapping actually means. Orthographic comes from the Greek forms orthos, meaning correct or straight, and graphein, meaning to write. So essentially we have the morpheme ORTH with a connector vowel O to another form GRAPH. And finally, that suffix IC, which makes adjectives. So it's having to do with the correct or proper writing or spelling. And side note, we also have that Greek ORTH, an orthodontist, a dentist who makes your teeth straight or proper. So orthographic mapping, quite literally, is mapping that correct and proper spelling of a word in our brain and attaching it to the pronunciation. But here's the kicker. Orthographic mapping is not a teaching strategy. It's a cognitive process, something that the brain does when it has to permanently store words for quick retrieval. Since orthographic mapping has become such a buzz term, I'll hear well-meaning teachers excited to be acquiring new knowledge about the science of reading say, "We're going to orthographically map these words today," or "Let's practice orthographic mapping." And this isn't entirely accurate. The thing is, orthographic mapping is not an activity. It's a cognitive process, and we can certainly engage students in activities that promote orthographic mapping, but we can't guarantee that mapping is actually happening for every or any student in that very moment. And that's because each learner may need a different number of meaningful encounters before a word is securely stored in long-term memory. That's why two students might engage in the same exact lesson. One maps the word and the other doesn't. And it's not just about the delivery of instruction. It's about internalizing the exposures based on which phase of reading they may be in. And one more big thing, students need to have a level of proficiency with the alphabetic principle. So internalizing those letter-sound relationships, as well as phonemic awareness, especially segmenting. If those aren't developed, mapping can't occur yet. And that term, orthographic mapping, it was first coined by Dr. Linnea Airy. She developed it as a theory to explain how we mentally store words for instant automatic retrieval. Again, it's the process that turns a word from something we have to sound out into something that we just know. It's also not just about the proper spelling. It's about creating this glue between that pronunciation with the spelling and even the meaning into memory. Dr. Katie Pace-Miles has worked extensively along Dr. Airy to expand upon this research. In fact, I had the pleasure of hearing both of them speak on this very topic at the Reading League conference last October. And let me tell you, it was incredible. And truly, I think I can listen to Dr. Katie Pace-Miles speak all day long. She is absolutely brilliant. And side note, in some related news, Dr. Katie Pace-Miles and Dr. Molly Ness joined forces and have a new book coming out this June as part of Scholastic's Science of Reading and Practice series. It's called Making Words Stick, a 4-step instructional routine to power up orthographic mapping. So the title alone shows us that it'll be helpful in putting the research into practice with an instructional routine. And you better believe I've already pre-ordered my copy and I can't wait to dig in. So if this particular podcast episode is of interest to you and you want to dig deeper yourself in the research to practice component, check out the link in the show notes for Making Words Stick. Anyway, again, essentially orthographic mapping is how we turn unfamiliar words into sight words, words that we can read instantly without effort. And here's the thing, it's not about memorizing a whole word visually. Instead, it's about connecting the sounds that we hear to the letters that we see and anchoring that connection with meaning. So yes, orthographic mapping is what allows us to look at a word and read it instantly in a flash, but we are not learning words by sight or through flashcards. We are learning by connecting the symbols to the pronunciation and making sense of that meaning. Think back to our high-frequency words. When we actually sift through them and analyze the letter-sound correspondences, an overwhelming majority of them are completely regular and completely decodable. Decodability, of course, will be reliant on what skills have been taught to date. But hey, working on CVC words? Guess what? Your kids can start reading at, can, had, ran, get, let, yes, if, in, big, did, on, got, not, up, us, but, and run. And okay, that's literally 18 words right there. And there are still several other VC and CVC words that fall into this category. Essentially, we need to be smarter with how we approach high-frequency words. The wisest thing to do is to group high-frequency words by phonics feature and teach them alongside your scope and sequence. But what about irregular words, or words that do have an unusual sound-spelling correspondence? Well, first things first, I am not one to throw around the word irregular loosey-goosey. There are very, very, very few words out there that are truly irregular. For words that do not have regular grapheme-phoneme correspondences, they typically can be explained with morphology and history. Secondly, we can still be explicit with our instruction in analyzing the structure of that word. For example, my 5-year-old daughter is starting to read books with CVC words. We've already gone over words like the and of and was, because as you know, most books can't get away with using some of these words, especially the and These are high-frequency, high-utility words for a reason, and we're certainly not going to wait until students learn about consonant digraphs and schwa to introduce a word like the. However, we also don't have to say, just memorize it. Often, words will have some regular sound-spelling relationships, and it's typically just the vowel sound that might be a little bit tricky. As for the word the, we still have the very regular voiced TH sound, th. It appears to be an open syllable, and I suppose some people may articulate the word as the, and I've seen sources that even say some people will choose to say the before a vowel. So in a sentence like, the horse ate the apples. But I don't think that's a hard, fast rule, and I certainly don't follow that myself when I speak. I certainly say the majority of the time. And I think the only time I do say the is when I say the end at the end of a book. And essentially, it's because we get lazy with the way we articulate certain sounds. The schwa comes into play, even though it's not a multisyllabic word in this case. So how do we teach these high-frequency words in a way that promotes orthographic mapping? Let me walk you through how I'd teach a word like the to my daughter or to a beginning reader. So when we come across this word, I might say this is the word the. Let's say the word the. How many sounds do you hear? Let's count them. Th, 2 sounds. We didn't learn this yet, but TH is working together as a team. We call this a consonant digraph. So we don't say t. TH says th, and we can stick our tongue between our teeth and use those articulatory gestures. The next sound is How do we usually spell Yes, with a U. But in this word, we're spelling it with an E, We just got lazy with the way we pronounce this sound. So let's look again closely. T-H-E, the. Spell it again. T-H-E, the. We're going to spell it with our sounds. As we trace over the sounds. So again, maybe she didn't learn digraphs yet, but we can still be explicit. It's like giving them a little nugget of wisdom about the code, and it's something coming down the pike that they can expect to learn in more depth soon. And if we want students to become fluent readers, we need to teach them according to how the brain actually learns. Making students memorize words is like throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping it will stick. There's no guarantee. We also have to break free of the beliefs that, well, if this child can memorize words, or if perhaps I grew up memorizing words, that all children can memorize words. Nancy Young's ladder of reading shows us that reading is effortless for about 5 to 10% of students. So hey, it does happen. However, the vast majority benefit from, and quite frankly, need explicit instruction and decoding. So let's make a promise to each other. Let's commit to what the research says and what the reading brain tells us. No more memorizing endless word lists. No more relying on guesswork. Moving forward, let's organize our high-frequency words by phonics skill and teach them systematically. If you're looking for more assistance in this work, be sure to check out the links in the show notes for some resources and some of my offerings. Let's give every word the chance to grow up and become a sight word the right way, mapped and meaningful. Thank you so much for tuning into Literacy in Color. I hope today's episode left you feeling both inspired and equipped with something new to add to your teaching toolkit. If you're enjoying this podcast, it would truly mean so much to me if you'd leave a 5-star review. It helps other educators find the show and join our colorful community. And don't forget to hit the follow or subscribe button so you never miss an episode. For more tips, tools, and resources, be sure to check out the links in the show notes at michelleandthecolorfulclassroom.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next week. Until then, be colorful and teach colorfully.